Sang Han So in Taipei and Barbara Weisel in Brussels. Barbara, let me start with you. The European Union just reassessed its stance towards China, criticizing its influence in Europe and labeling the country a systematic rival. How is this changed attitude likely to impact the talks?
That is going, of course, to impact the talks, because this is the first meeting after the EU really reassessed its relationship with China and its position towards China. In the last years, if we look at it, I mean, these complaints you already mentioned, intellectual property theft, dumping, state aid that was hidden, lack of transparency, lack of market access. I mean, there's a long range that already has been there. It's always been known. European business always complained about this. And now, finally, the EU has said, we have looked on long enough. We have looked on and not taken action. We have not made clear where our interests are. And we just finally need to take a stand. So if you talk to Europeans these days, here in Brussels, the word is, this is the end of naivety towards China. We just have to assert our own position and our own interests. And that is what this meeting is about. And yes, it will be a totally changed climate. The more emollient stance of the earlier years, where the EU would always sort of complain a bit, but then in the end give in, that is not going to be like that anymore.
So over to you. What does China expect from the summit?
Well, I've spoken to some Chinese experts. They think the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang want to use this platform to emphasize again that China is still a developing country and is trying really hard to make some structural changes. For example, he has just passed the foreign investment law, which focus on intellectual property protection and forced technology transferred. So they want to emphasize they've done a lot. So they want to reiterate their perspective and efforts to persuade more EU countries to work with them.
Now, in a piece for Germany's Handelsblatt newspaper, Li Keqiang said Beijing welcomed a, quote, united and prosperous Europe. How much truth is there to that? So when China seems to divide the Europeans by making Italy part of its controversial Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, it's actually a very different understanding if you read Li Keqiang's words. He said that Beijing's cooperation with Eastern and Central European countries will actually help to balance the economic development and the unity of EU. So his interpretation and his definition is very different from Germany's and France's. And China knows that compared with the disagreement among EU members, its investment offer is far more attractive. So for China, it's very easy to understand that no matter people want to call it a systemic rival or a mischief maker, China is confident that more EU countries will tilt to its side.
Now, Barbara, back to you in Brussels. There won't be a final communiqué after this summit. What are we to make of this?
Now, that, of course, is a diplomatic point that the EU is making here, because other than sort of reiterating its long list of complaints and then in the end saying, OK, let's just carry on, this time they really want to make sure that the message is heard in Beijing. And that really is the main difference. We also know, I mean, referring to what we just heard from Taipei, we know that Li is going to go on to Croatia after he leaves Brussels. And that, of course, for many European countries and the big countries is seen as another attempt to sort of divide and rule and trying to carve out some countries from the European Union, particularly with the 16+1 initiative that sort of forms a sort of Eastern bloc. However, if you look more closely, you see that not everybody is happy in there. Poland already is complaining about some kinds of Chinese investment that didn't turn out as well as Russia hoped. So it is a very difficult and fluid situation politically, but the EU is not going to be the one that sort of let itself be ridden over roughshod like it happened in the past.